I just want to give a quick disclaimer before we get started. You can just skip to the next chapter if you want, but you're probably going to notice that the visual presentation in this video, and a few more to come, is a lot simpler than what I normally do. No wacky transitions and keyframing and the like. That's because I've realized that this over-editing is what's been slowing down my video production, and considering the type of content that I make, I don't feel like it truly justifies how long you guys gotta wait for a new upload. Not to mention that whenever I come up with a video topic, by the time I'm halfway done editing it, I've already lost interest and start getting sloppy with my choice of footage. So I'm not sure how much that actually comes across. So in order to provide you guys with more content that is still fresh as it's being worked on, I've decided on this new direction for my visual presentation. But don't worry, the cool music transitions are here to stay. You probably already know that I'm a big fan of emulation. It's what made most of my videos possible in the first place. Well, I've been dabbling with Zemu, an OG Xbox emulator that has been making great progress in recent years, and as you might expect, not every game is fully playable yet, and unfortunately for me, the only Xbox exclusive I've ever truly been interested in, that being the first Forza Motorsport, is not quite there yet. Despite that, it's still playable enough that I've been able to get probably a couple dozen hours of enjoyment out of it, and how I went about doing that is what this video is all about. As you're watching this footage, you're probably confused as to why the game isn't considered playable. Sure, it's got some graphical bugs, though in spite of this, it still looks great for early 2005 on a console that came out late 01, but other than that, it seems to run quite well. That it does. Until you start a race against more than just the clock. I think I have a theory as to why this happens. It might seem at first like it's something to do with the rendering of the car models, but when you're just sitting at the starting line, everything's fine, which leads me to believe it's related to all the necessary physics calculations, or the drivatar system is giving the emulated CPU a hard time. Whatever the reason, the result is a career mode that is basically unplayable, but almost as if the developers could see into the future, we've still got the trusty time trial mode. Naturally, this is where I've spent nearly all of my time with this game, and while I've never really been one to obsess over lap time since all I really care about is being just about in front of the guy in second, I found several things that this game does really well, which make even just setting records to be a fulfilling experience. In fact, I got so into it that I went out of my way to make a custom logo and cover art for a version of this game that never happened, and that was before I even considered doing a video about it. As the game is stripped of its AI, the experience now hinges on just two of the many pillars of a good driving experience: track design and car handling. Let's look at the former first. Forza Motorsport's track selection is rather varied, consisting of real-life and fictional tracks, along with some Porsche Unleashed-inspired point-to-points, although those aren't available in the dedicated time trial mode, so I'll try not to bring them up too often. Being a racer that aims to be an accessible but still challenging simulation of the sport, track memorization is absolutely essential to setting decent lap times, as the handling model, which I'll talk about more later, does not allow for your typical arcade shenanigans like accelerated power sliding or taking a corner at the snap of a finger. As you restart these trials over and over again, you start to develop an intimate familiarity with each section, every kink in the tarmac, and every deceptive corner that you swear you're prepared for every time, but then you always understeer and lose speed. By having to spend this much time learning the ins and outs of each course, you really feel like you're getting a lot more out of them than if you were to simply treat them as a vessel for bumper-to-bumper action. I've just come up with an analogy that applies quite nicely to how focusing on one tiny part of a game for a long time can then make the rest of the existing content feel that much more like a treat. So you know when you get stuck on a certain part of a game, be it a BS level in a platformer, unbalanced encounter, or a Gran Turismo license test, you start to forget the rest of the game even exists. Like, the game in question just becomes that particular scenario and there is nothing after it. What's happened during my experience with Forza here is like a sort of self-inflicted version of that, where I'll spend half an hour on just one track until I get a run I'm satisfied with, and when I finally get there, it's like the next track is an expansion pack or something. A breath of fresh air, you know? This also extends to the car selection, since each of the pre-made time trial events provide you with a designated car, some of which you wouldn't have available at the start of the game in free run, so driving them feels a little more special. And speaking of cars, let's go over the handling model, because what I'm about to say may sound odd considering my general preference in racing games, especially if you've actually watched my Need for Speed retrospective. Forza Motorsport may just have the best all-around driving model of any 6th generation racing game. And yeah, this is coming from the guy who disliked Porsche Unleashed's handling. Obviously, my first reason for loving this model is context. If I wasn't limited to just myself on the track, I probably wouldn't mind some more arcadey handling to battle with my opponents. But since that's not part of the package, The weight of the game's fun factor rests on the cars striking that balance between responsiveness and the demand for control. You can't have the driving be too predictable, because with no opponents that would make for some really dull on-track action. Unless we're talking Trackmania, of course. But it also can't be too feisty, because then you'd only be able to play this game with a wheel, and seeing as this was initially a console game, that would have been a pretty bad idea. Fortunately, the driving is damn near perfect here. The way the body reacts to sudden braking and cornering, the feel of the suspension and tires being right on the edge of grip, and the pure clutch when you save yourself from a slide. It all makes for uncut, vehicle-induced dopamine from the screen to your fingers to your brain, and this video would not have happened if it weren't for that. I mentioned earlier that each track comes with a dedicated car. That's another aspect in which the driving model shines, since every car has its own weight values, drivetrain, tire pressure, aerodynamics, etc., as well as every track having its own tarmac temperature and wind speed. No two trials feel the same. You start to treat each car less like a means of completing events and earning money to buy the next means of completing events, but instead as individual characters like in a fighting game with their own quirks, strengths, and weaknesses. Adding further distinct qualities to each drive are the assists, or rather lack thereof. Obviously, being a 6th generation racer, Forza offers your usual racing line, ABS, traction, and stability control, and they make handling these cars a lot more manageable for beginners. Due to the nature of these events, however, you will always be faster about them, assuming you're good enough. While I wouldn't consider myself great at the more realistic types of racing games, I still get a lot out of going back and forth when it comes to the assists. Specifically, I enjoy turning them on and setting the fastest lap I can, then turning them all off and seeing if I can keep up. While it can feel a little discouraging at first when you see your ghost leave you behind, demonstrating just how much those assists help out, there's nothing quite like putting in the time and actually improving upon your original assist-enabled run. In a current gaming landscape of constantly having a metaphorical carrot dangled in front of you in pretty much every genre, you know, like a shiny new gun or character skin or just any progression gated unlockable that exists solely to give you that psychological incentive to keep playing, this little exercise I decided to try for myself almost felt like a cleanse of sorts. The process and experience of self-improvement through trial and error becomes very different when you're trying your best to provide your own drive. You tell yourself that the next lap will be the one, or you swear you can shave at least 2 seconds off that sector. Honestly, the best part of it is the fact that all of it is happening at your own pace, rather than having to keep up with progressively more challenging bots, or in a more contemporary competitive setting, the most dedicated players in the world. There's obviously nothing wrong with competition, but there's still a lot of value in dialing back your scope and taking a moment to savor those little victories, even if they don't mean anything in your typical video game sort of way. There's not even any developer times to beat. You're still becoming a better driver, which is both an intrinsic reward, since driving better is simply more fun, especially with Forza's physics, and also an extrinsic reward for when you eventually do get into some proper competition. Okay, this is getting a little pretentious now, but I hope I was able to get my point across. Making your own replay value takes effort, and honestly, with a number of other great racing games both on PC and properly emulatable consoles, this whole thing might have been a little redundant, but value is still value, and I was able to get my allegorical money's worth out of Forza Time Trials. Don't get me wrong, the moment ZEMU gets good enough to emulate the AI correctly, I'm diving straight into the career mode, because from what I've gathered, it's essentially Gran Turismo, but without the license tests and way better handling if you ask me. But in the meantime, Forza's time trial mode is something you'll get a lot more out of than what the developers probably anticipated. If you've got the CPU for it, since ZEMU seems to be a bit more processor intensive compared to graphics, I'd highly recommend you get your hands on an X ISO of this game and give it a shot, even as just a distraction from whatever you're currently playing.